Mishnah. Okay, we are at the Mishnah on 108a, towards the bottom of the page. Okay. Talking about offering things and slaughtering things outside of the first courtyard. So there's offering and there's slaughtering. Each one has a stringency that the other one doesn't have. So says the Mishnah, Chomer b'shchita be'aliyah, or ba'aliyah b'shchita. Shchita is slaughtering, has a stringency over bringing up, like making aliyah. It's also bringing up an offering. And bringing up has a stringency that shchita does not have. What are these stringencies? Chomer b'shchita, sha'ashochet l'hedyer chayim. If you slaughter for me, you bring your sacrifice, you slaughter at the temple with having me in mind, you're still liable for slaughtering a sacrifice outside the temple. Now, if you do the same thing, if you bring up the offering for Gleizer, that's called idol worship. So you're going to be potter, you're going to be exempt, and not for idol worship. You'll be liable. You'll be exempt for the violation of bringing up a sacrifice outside the temple. So for slaughtering, if you do it for somebody, we'll see it's all going to be scriptural sources. For slaughtering, it's going to still make you liable for slaughtering outside the temple. For bringing up a sacrifice for a certain person, that's going to be idol worship. So you'll be exempt for this case, for this punishment. Okay. Now, yeah, you slaughter it for me. You do me a favor while that film is going so well. You slaughter a sacrifice and bring it up for me. You won't be liable for bringing up sacrifice outside the temple. You will be liable for idol worship. So don't do it. So okay. Chomer ba'aliyah, a stringency of bringing up a sacrifice on the temple, outside the temple is shnayim she'achzu b'sakin hashav k'pturim achzu be'er v'helu chayavin. If two people hold on to a knife and they slaughter together, exempt. That's not a good slaughtering. It has to be one person slaughtering. If two people hold a limb, part of the animal, and bring it up as a sacrifice outside the altar, that you're going to be liable. So slaughtering is stringencies. If you do it for a commoner, meaning not for a shem, for a person, you'll be liable. Bring up a sacrifice, you'll be exempt. If two people slaughter, you'll be exempt. If two people bring up, you'll be liable. Each one has something that the other one doesn't have. Okay. You go, you bring up an offering, you bring it back down, you put it back up, you bring it back down, you put it back up, you bring it back down, put it back up. Rabbi Shimon says you're liable each and every time you go and take it down and bring it back up. Meaning from that animal, not from a different animal. So you put it on, you take it off, put it on, you take it off. So Rabbi Yossi Omer Eino Chayv El Achas, the Gemara will explain what the machlokas is. He says only liable one, not for each time you bring it up. You're only liable for this animal that's brought, not for each bringing up, but for the animal that's sacrificed outside the temple. Hang it up, keep it back down, bring it up. Yeah. It's like sometimes people barbecue their meat. You take it back off, stoke the fire a little bit, put it back on, maybe something like that. Yeah. You change your mind. No, never mind. You feel guilty conscience. I don't know. So yeah. So now, okay. Do you have to build an altar to be liable for bringing up a sacrifice outside the temple? Is in building an altar and bringing on the altar one of the requirements, or bringing up on any stone, any kind of rock is sufficient to be liable? So that we're saying, the first opinion says you got to build an altar and put on the altar. Two types of rocks. And even if you do on either of these types of rocks, you are going to be liable. I think a cell is a little bigger than an Evan. I'm not sure exactly. But either way. So that's that. So we have a few different debates in the Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to go through all of them. First thing is, what's the difference that by bringing up a sacrifice, if you do it for a commoner, you're going to be liable, you're going to be exempt. And if you do shchita for a commoner, you're going to be liable. So a lot of back and forth with the verses. It says by bringing up La Hashem, you're only liable if you do it for God, not for a commoner. I b'shchita, by slaughtering Nami Haksiv La Hashem. It says La Hashem also. Shiny Hasam Damakra Ish Ish. No, but by shchita, even though it says La Hashem, it has a double language, Ish Ish, to include even slaughtering for a commoner is going to be liable. Okay, but the same word Ish Ish is used by bringing up a sacrifice, and there you're not liable if you do it for a commoner. That's because the Ish Ish, the double language of man, teaches you that if two people bring it up, then you're going to be liable. That's what the double language is. So okay, but by shchita also it says Ish Ish. It should teach you that if two people hold a knife and slaughter, you should be liable. Says the Gemara, no. Shiny Hasan Damakra Hahu. Only he's liable. Only one guy could be liable for slaughtering, and not two people. So therefore, you can't learn Ish Ish like that. Okay, okay, but by Hala, by bringing up a sacrifice, it says Hahu, only him. One person, not two people. And yet you told me that two people that bring up a sacrifice are going to be liable. How can that be? That the Gemara says, turning the page, we need Hahu by bringing up a sacrifice to exclude Shogeg Anus Muta. Hahu means the person has to be in a totally conscious state of mind that he is doing something wrong. If he's a Shogeg, meaning if he's inadvertently doing it, he has no idea that, what's the difference? My rabbi told me to bring a sacrifice. He didn't tell me temple, not temple. I bring it up. He has no idea that it's wrong. Or he's being coerced, or he just makes a mistake. He mistakenly thinks he makes a mistake and brings it. All of those, he's not fully in his fully conscious state, meaning he's not fully there with it, knowing the halachas. Therefore, he's going to be exempt. So maybe you need therefore the hahu to do the same thing by shchita. Instead of excluding two people, instead of excluding two people, it should do this. So that the Gemara says, Trey hahu ksivi. It says hahu twice. So that's how by shchita you can learn the same thing. It says hahu twice over there. Why does it say la Hashem by shchita? If you're even liable if you slaughter it for a commoner, so then why does it say you have to do it for God? Lahotzi seir hamishtalech. It's coming to exclude a korban that's not fit to be brought up to Hashem. What's a korban that's not fit to be brought up to Hashem? That is the he-goat on Yom Kippur that is thrown off the cliff. That's a sacrifice, but it's not going to be brought up to Hashem. So La Hashem is going to exclude that. So if you take that sacrifice and slaughter it, I guess, outside the temple, so that's not going to be liable. Because it's not La Hashem, it's not fit to be brought to Hashem. It's supposed to be thrown off a cliff. Okay, Chomer B'Halal. So now the bring up of a sacrifice has a stringency over Shchita. What was its stringency? Two people that bring up together are liable, as opposed to two people who slaughter are not liable. So, it says ish ish. What's it coming to teach me? It's coming to include two people that bring up a limb of an animal that they're going to be liable. Now, why would you have thought you're going to be exempt? You need a verse to teach me you're liable, means that your starting assumption was you're going to be exempt. Why would you think you're going to be exempt? The halo dinhu, logically you would say the following: if one slaughters for a commoner, you're liable, and yet two people who hold the knife and they slaughter are going to be exempt. So you see that it's very strict. Even for a commoner, you're liable, and yet it has a leniency that two people are going to be exempt. So the bringing up, it has a leniency that if you do it for a commoner, you're going to be exempt. For sure, should have the leniency, even if two people do it, that you should be exempt as well. Eino din sheshnaim she'aksu pturin. To that we say, logically you're right. However, the Torah comes and tells you against your logic. Talmud Omer ish ish. It says ish ish, double language, to include that two people that bring up a sacrifice together are going to be liable. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Dear Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yossi Omer, hahu. It says hahu. Echad v'lo shnayim. By bringing up a sacrifice, one person has to bring it and not two. So according to Rabbi Yossi, what does he do with the double language ish ish? Imkein ma'atam alomer ish ish. It says ish ish. What's that going to teach you? Man, what's going to teach you? This we have is every so often. Dibra Torah kilashim b'nei adam. Sometimes the Gemara says that Torah speaks, so to speak, in the language of man, and sometimes, therefore, when language is repeated, it'll revert back to that. Sometimes it's spoken in a more human language, and that's why it's repeated, but not for exposition. Now, Rabbi Shimon, what does Rabbi Shimon do with Rabbi Yossi? What does he do with hahu? So he can't use it to mean one and not two because he holds two people are alive. He used it already for Ish comes and tells you that two people are liable. So what does hahu come to teach you? So to that he says, we had earlier hahu comes to teach you. You have to be in your full state of mind, knowing that you're doing something wrong. If you do it inadvertently, coerced, or mistakenly, that's going to be exempt. Rabbi Yossi. What about Rabbi Yossi? How does he know that halacha? He says mehu hahu. It doesn't say just who, him. It says hahu. So the extra hey teaches you that you have to be in a full state of mind, and who teaches you has to be one person and not two. Rabbi Shimon, who hahu lo darish. That extra hey he does not expound. Rabbi Yossi made a high ish ish. Dibra Torah kilashim b'nei adam. Once you, Rabbi Yossi, tell me that the double language of ish ish is speaking in the way that humans speak. So then, hahu ish ish. Now I'm Dibra Torah kilashim b'nei adam. So then, why didn't you say the same thing by shchita? And if that's true, the ela hashokh lehedim minolei, then someone who slaughters outside the temple, how do you know that you're liable? If you slaughter for a commoner outside the temple, if you tell me that the double language of ish ish is just the way people speak, and it's not. I mean, the Torah is speaking in more of a human language, and it's not used for exposition. So how do you know that slaughtering for a commoner is going to be liable? So Rabbi Yossi says, I have another verse. Those words, the blood should be considered for that person is extra, and that comes to teach you that even one who slaughters for a commoner is going to be liable. Okay, so machlokas, two opinions, is two people bringing up a sacrifice liable or not. Our Mishnah and this opinion in the Brisa says they are, and Rabbi Yossi argues and says not. Okay, bringing up, putting back down, bringing up, and putting back down. So we're going to have three different opinions what the machlokas is. So one by one. First one is Amar Reish Lakish, machlokas be'arba v'chamisha evar. Says Reish Lakish, the debate in our Mishnah, if you're liable for each time you bring up a sacrifice, or no, you're only liable for one animal, not for each time you bring up that animal. You're only liable for one animal total. You can bring it up 1.5 million times, it doesn't matter. As long as it's the same animal, you're only liable one, as opposed to the other opinion that's going to say you'll be liable each and every time. So, So now, okay, so Amar Reish Lakish, machlokas in the Mishnah is as follows: Arba v'chamisha evarim. You have 4 or 5 of the limbs of the animal. So, Dimar, several master holds, kiksiv la'asos oso, al shalim uchayiv, bein uchayiv al chaser, akol behem maksiv. You're liable, it says la'asos oso, to do this, the entire animal. It's only when you bring up the entire animal. That's when you're going to be liable, and not liable for each and every limb you bring up. So therefore, since you're liable for the animal, it's only once you brought the animal. Bring up, so in this case, we're talking about, let's say the animal consists of 5 limbs. Now, the whole piece of meat here is 5 different limbs. So are you liable for each limb you bring up, or are you liable for the entire animal? So the first opinion says that no, it's the entire animal, because the Torah wants the entire animal. That's when you're liable. However, Umar Savar Akul Ever Ever, when it says so, it's not coming to exclude An animal is coming to tell you that each limb is considered its own complete entity, and therefore each limb you'll be liable, even if it's all part of one animal. However, aval aver echad. Now, in this case, we're talking about when the entire animal is brought up already, except for one limb. In this case, when you bring up that last limb, aval aver echad, divrei hakol eno chayv al achad. There, everyone agrees that you're only going to be liable one, meaning one second. So now, according to yeah, so in this case where it's the final limb, I think it's the final limb. Shimon says you're liable for each and every bringing up. Rabbi Dovid says you're liable for one. So, right, meaning even the opinion that says that you're liable for the full animal, if it's the final limb of that animal, so then even he'll agree that you'll be liable. So, because this completes the animal. If you hold every limb is liable, for sure you're liable. But even if you hold the entire animal is liable, so the final limb, you'll also be liable. Is that what it is?
The other master holds is not liable, but in a case where one offers up 4 or 5 limbs, all agree is liable for each and every limb.
That's coming up next.
Second,
Right before that.
Rabbi Yochanan.
Right before that. The line before that.
But the other master, Rabbi Shimon, holds that it is written concerning each and every limb. But where one offers up a single limb in part, all agree that he is liable for only one half. Second opinion, Rabbi Yochanan said.
We're not there. That's right now. Yeah. So once again, Reish Lakish says that machlokus is when you have 4 or 5 limbs of the animal, are liable for each and every limb or only for the whole animal itself. The Rabbi Yochanan Amar as follows: machlokus be'aver echad. By one limb they argue. Mar savar. So now, what's that debate? There's a debate by one limb. Are you liable or are you not liable? So what's that debate? So machlokas be'aver echad, by one limb. Now, yeah. So here, everyone agrees that every single limb you're going to be liable. Well, if everyone agrees that for every limb you're going to be liable, so where is their debate? So their debate is, you have an animal that was brought up on the altar inside, and one limb came flying off the altar. So now, if you hold, you're obligated to put it back on the altar. Then if you bring that limb outside the temple, you're going to be liable. So the first opinion says, an offering that was brought inside, and then one of the limbs came off. If you bring that outside, you'll be liable. Umar savar putter, and Mar savar putter. Umar savar putter. No, you'll be exempt. Sounds like you don't have to put on that. Either you don't have to put on the limb back on the altar, or he has another verse telling you why you're exempt. But so that's their debate. However, a regular case of of course they agree, that if you have an animal that consists of 4 or 5 limbs, for each and every limb, you're going to be liable. Their whole debate is when it was offering that was inside, one limb came off, are you liable for that? That is a debate that argues on Ula. This now the third opinion. Upliga de Ula. What does Ula say? The Amar Ula. Now there's going to be 2 versions of Ula. So 3a and 3b. So Upliga de Ula. The Amar Ula Hakol Modim Ula says that everybody agrees. If an animal is brought inside and then one of the limbs comes flying off, that limb, if you bring it outside the temple, you're going to be liable because everyone agrees that if a limb comes off the altar, you got to put it back on the altar. So if you're taking something which should be on the altar and bringing it up outside the temple, you'll be liable. Ula says everyone agrees to that. So where is their debate? A little bit of a funny case. You have an offering that basically is invalid. Mukter chutz means you're going to bring it outside, meaning it's not valid to be brought outside. It's not valid to be brought inside the temple. So it's an invalid offering. And now that offering is lacking, let's say, a limb breaks off. So now a limb from an invalid offering, if you bring it outside, mar savar potter, umar savar chayev. One opinion says you're going to be liable, and one opinion says you're going to be exempt. So that's where they debate. Do you say that any limb, even of an invalid offering, if you bring it up, it's going to be liable? Or you say no, only from an offering that was going to be valid to be brought inside the temple, will you be liable? Now, that's the first opinion of that's 3A. Now, 3B. Everyone agrees that if you have a limb that comes off an animal of an invalid offering, and you bring that up, you're for sure exempt. They disagree about when you have a sacrifice that was put on the altar and a limb comes off. Does that limb, if you bring that outside the temple, will you be liable or not? So, which is basically, I think that's really Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. Meaning 3B is the same as 2, I think. So, mar savar chayev and mar savar potter. So one says you're exempt, and one says you're not exempt. So really you have 3 opinions. I think 3B is really the same as 2. Now, this upligi davua de Shmuel alishna kama deula. The father of Shmuel argues on 3A, on the first version of Ula. Why? Now, what was the first version of Ula? The first version of Ula told us that everyone agrees if a limb comes off the altar, that if you bring it outside a temple, you'll be liable. They only disagreed if it's a limb of an invalid sacrifice outside the temple. There they had a debate. If you bring that up, are you liable or not? But 3A was of the opinion that if it's a limb that comes off of the altar, everyone agrees that you have to put it back on the altar, and therefore, if you go and you bring it up outside, that you're going to be liable. That is in contrast with the father of Shmuel. The Amar Avua de Shmuel, Kiman Mehadrinan Tokin Legam Mizmeach. According to who do you say that you have to put the limb back on the altar? Kiman Dilo Reb Yossi. The father of Shmuel says that according to Reb Yossi, there's no obligation to put a limb that came off of the altar back on the altar. Now, if there's no obligation to put it back on the altar, there's not going to be any liability if you offer it outside. 3A said that both Rabbi Yossi and Reb Shimon and the Mishnah agreed that you're liable for a limb that comes off the altar if you offer it outside the temple, because if it comes off the altar, you have to put it back on the altar. That is in contrast to the father of Shmuel, who said that according to Rabbi Yossi, there is no obligation to put a limb back on the altar if it comes off. Therefore, if you offer that up outside the temple, you are not going to be liable. So 3A is in contrast to the father of Shmuel. Okay. Next part. Do you need an altar or do you not need an altar? So, can you put on a rock and be liable, or you have to build an altar? So, why does Rabbi Yossi require an altar? Interesting, out of all places, Noah, after the flood was over, he came out, built an altar, and sacrificed an offering to Hashem. But what does it say? He built an altar. Why'd you build an altar? What was the necessity to build an altar? Just do it on a rock. Oh, you see from there that when you bring sacrifices, you have to build an altar. Or else, why did Noah do it? So, Rabbi Yochanan, that's so good. So what does Rabbi Shimon hold? My time is Rabbi Shimon who says you can put on a stone. So now there's a whole story about an angel told Manoach, I think he's going to have a child named Shimshon. He should go and bring a sacrifice. And it says there, Manoach listened, and it says, Vayikach Manoach as Gediha he took the baby goat, that's a mincha and the offering, but y'all Hashem, and he brought it up on a stone. So we refer to Hashem as our rock, Hashem Tsuri. So he put up on a rock to God. But what do you see? He brought it up on a rock. He didn't build an altar. Oh, so Manoach, on the one hand, put on a rock. Noach built an altar. So each one has a compelling reason. So now, what's going to happen? What does each one do with the other one's proof? So, the Idach Nami, Hashem. So the second opinion, what do you do with the fact that Noach built an altar to God? He says, no, Hahu Gova Ba'alma. You built an altar because it was easier to bring a sacrifice like that. You put a little higher up, you have a little elevation, and correct. I don't simply understood it means practically. But I'm wondering if it means more than that. Maybe it means that the more comfortable you can bring a sacrifice, the more the more beautiful it is to Hashem. And if you can do it in a better way, so it's not just that practically it's easier. That's a simple understanding. But maybe it means, and therefore you can do it in a nicer way, more concentration, more So okay, so now what does he do with the other verse? I Manoach. So he says, no, Manoach was Harosha. Manoach was only for that time period. An angel told him to do it, so he did it. But that's not a ruling for all generations. That was a special exception to Manoach. Okay. That is one explanation according to Rav Huna of the reason. Now, I have another answer for why Reb Shimon allows you to bring it onto a stone. Maybe you'll say that even the reason that Manoach was only the reason that the one who disagreed with Reb Shimon, and he said that because the angel told him it was only a ruling for that generation, maybe that was compelling. So therefore, you have to have another reason for Reb Shimon, which is as follows. Reb Shimon Omer, it says, Mizbeach Pesach Ohel Moed, our verse over there in the 17th chapter of Vayikra, talks about it has to be things that have to come to the entrance of the tent of meeting. So what does that mean? Mizbeach Pesach Ohel Moed, the Ein Mizbeach B'Bama. It says it's basically only things that are going to the Kohen's going to throw the blood on the Mizbeach in the Pesach Ohel Moed. But it says there that the sacrifices are only going to be good if it's something which has to do with the altar. So the Ein Mizbeach B'Bama, and there's no altar when it comes to the Bamas. Lefikach hela ala sela or ala evan chai. So I think what he's saying is that the whole requirement for the altar is when you have an altar. But by the bama, when at the time where it's permissible to bring sacrifices outside the temple, there is no requirement of having to throw the blood onto the altar. Because if you can bring a sacrifice even outside the temple, there's no throwing the blood on the altar. So therefore, if you would bring it up on a rock or a stone, you're going to be liable. Meaning, we see from the fact that the obligation of an altar is only it's only when you want to bring a sacrifice inside the temple. But outside the temple, there is no altar. So therefore, if you now bring a sacrifice outside of the temple on a stone, you'll be liable because I'm showing you that you don't always need an altar to bring a sacrifice. And as long as you could bring up a sacrifice without an altar, which is during the times where these mounds, the bamas, were permitted, so therefore, even when you do it when it's not permitted, you're still going to be liable. Says the Gemara, assuming that we're now talking about the time where it was permitted to bring sacrifices outside the temple on the bamos, where that's our assumption. To that, the Gemara says, Chayiv, Yatzami Baile. What do you mean you're obligated? The assumption now is that we're talking about a time period where it's permitted to bring up an offering outside the temple. So the wording should be you fulfilled your obligation, not that you're liable. That the Gemara says you're right. So read it like this: Hachi Kamar lefikach b'shas. Therefore, b'shas iser bamos. When it's a time that it's prohibited to offer a sacrifice outside the temple, hel ala sel ala even chayiv. You'll be liable. Meaning, at a time when it's permitted to bring a sacrifice outside the temple, I'm showing you that you can bring a valid sacrifice with no altar. Therefore, even at a time where it is prohibited to bring a sacrifice outside the altar, if you do it with no altar, it's going to be liable. Because we have a time, we have an idea that sacrifices are valid with no altar. Therefore, it'll play its way out in terms of the liability of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple, even with no altar. Okay. Now, if you require an altar like the first opinion does, so do you require all the qualifications of the altar? Do you need the horns and the ramp and the foundation and the squaring of the altar outside the temple, and only then you're going to be liable? Or any kind of formation of an altar is fine. So they point out, if you don't have any of these, what do you have? So I think they answer that no, a few rocks together already can be considered an altar. And even without all these things, even a few rocks together has some resemblance of an altar, as opposed to just one rock. So, ma'hu sheyakvu b'bama. So, if you don't have these things, is that going to prevent you from bringing an offering on a bama outside the temple? Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Tanya. The price says, "Karen mekadosh remove yisod ma'akrin b'bama gedola, the ein ma'akrin b'bama ktana." Interesting. A bama gedola literally means a big mound. What it means is a public mound. So Rashi says that in the place of Nov and Givon and these big public mounds, they're called the bamos tzibur, the communal mound, where you would bring it. And for sure in Shiloh, where we had the altar, and at the time of the base of Mikdash, at a certain time where you had these big communal mounds, so then you would need to have an altar with these qualifications on those mounds in order to bring up a sacrifice. However, the ein ma'akvin b'bamaktana, they're not going to prevent you from bringing an offering on the small, the private mound. At the time that it was permitted to bring sacrifices, if you want to build a little mound in your backyard and bring a sacrifice there, you would not require these four qualifications of an altar, of the foundation and the horns and the squaring and the ramp. Okay, next page. And next mission. Echad kachim sheirim, v'echad kachim psulim, shahaya psulim b'kodesh, v'krivan b'chutz chayiv. Any sacrifice, whether it's a very holy sacrifice or a lesser holy sacrifice, any invalidation that happened once you're in the holy area, so it became impure, or you took it back out, any disqualification that happens once it's basically fit to be brought up, that sacrifice that you bring outside the temple, you'll be liable. It was fit, then there was some kind of invalidation that happened, you'll still be liable if you sacrifice it outside. Why? So Rashi explains, because if you had that invalidation, if you were to put it up on the altar, you'd be allowed to leave it on there. You would not be required to remove it from the altar. So it's still something which the altar can swallow, so to speak, could consume. So therefore, it has a certain level of sanctity. Once it has a certain level of sanctity, if you go and offer it outside, then you're going to be liable. Yeah, if you offer up an olive's worth of the meat and the sacrificial parts, the limbs of the ola outside, you're going to be chayiv, meaning half an olive worth of meat and half an olive worth of sacrificial limbs combined together for one kazayas, you are going to be liable. Now, it's only an ola, not other things. We'll see why. It says the brisa asher yala ola. It says if you bring an ola outside the temple, you're going to be liable. And here we're going to go through how do you know the source of bringing everything outside the temple, you'll be liable. Almost everything. So, how do I know to include the sacrificial parts of a guilt offering, a sin offering, the holy sacrifice, and less holy sacrifices? And if you bring those up outside the temple, you're going to be liable. A sacrifice, any sacrifice. Okay, that's only an animal. How do I know to include the flour offering, scooping of the flour, or the levona, or the special incense, the frankincense, the actores, the special actores that was brought of all different kinds of ingredients and spices, Minchas Kohanim, the special flour offering of the Kohanim, Minchas Kol Mashiach, the special flour offering of the Kohen Gadol, the Menasech, and libations, 3 lugin, 3 measurements of libations, of wine, and of water. How do you know if you do all of those outside the temple, you're going to be liable? Talmud Lomar, Pesach Ol Moed, Lo Yavienu, Kol Abala Pesach Ol Moed, Chayav Alav B'chutz. Anything which could be done inside the tent of meeting, if you do it outside, you'll be liable. All these things are things that are brought inside the tent of meeting, meaning they're all done inside the temple. If you do them outside, then you're going to be liable. The Aili Alakachim Sherim. So now this all by valid and kosher sacrifices. Minayin the rabbos psul, have an invalid sacrifice. How do I know? Kigon, for example, halon, you have a sacrifice that stayed overnight and now it's invalid. V'hayotz, or you removed it outside the temple and now it's invalid. Or v'hatami, or it became impure and now it's invalid. Or v'nishchat chutz l'zmano, you slaughtered with the wrong intention, pigel, outside to be consumed outside the right time. Or v'chutz l'koma, or outside the right place, you want to consume it in Portland. All those cause invalidations. That's all pigel. Or v'shekil psulin, or a non-kosher kohen accepts the blood. That's also invalid. Or v'zarko as damo v'hani tanim lamata, or you apply the blood in the wrong place. You put the blood that goes towards the bottom of the altar. You apply the blood in the wrong area. Either the one above goes below, the one below goes above. All these are all invalidation. Or you apply it outside, not in the right place, not on the altar, outside somewhere. Or I'm sorry, the blood that's supposed to be applied in the outer altar, you apply it on the inner altar, or you apply the inner offering blood on the outer altar, or or a Pesach offering or a sin offering, which is brought with the wrong intention. You have in mind to bring an Ola or a Shlamim, or anything which is not a Pesach or a Chatas offering. All of those cause invalidation. How do I know that if I bring any of these invalidations outside the temple, I'm going to be liable? Talmud Lomar, Lo Yavienu Lasos. All of these, the verse says that you cannot bring them in. You can't bring these things in. So anything which is accepted, all these things, the invalidation happened once it was fitting to be brought as a sacrifice. And then you messed up. It was fitting, and you applied the blood in the wrong place. It was fitting, then you caused impurity. It was fitting, you brought it outside, etc., etc., etc. So all these things that were fitting to be brought on the altar and now became invalid, if now in their invalid state, you bring them outside the temple, you are going to be liable. Says the Gemara, if you bring a kazayas, half a kazayas of meat, of an ola, and half a kazayas of the sacrificial limbs, you are going to be liable. Says the Gemara, ola ve'emureha in shlamim or that's only an ola, but not a shlamim. Why? Because because by a shlamim, by an ola, it's all fully consumed. However, by a shlamim, it depends. The sacrificial parts go on the altar, but the meat is consumed. The meat a person eats. So those two are not the same. In ola, everything's the same. It all gets burnt up. You can combine them to get you an olive's worth and be liable outside. But half an olive's worth of a shlamim that's supposed to be consumed, and half an olive's worth that's going to be consumed by the altar, and half an olive's worth that's going to be consumed by a human being, those two do not combine together. Those are different things, and therefore they're not going to combine together and make you liable for bringing it up outside. Also, Rashi points out that the meat is not something which goes on the altar. We just had a whole brisa telling you things that are fit to put on the altar. If you bring it outside the temple, then you'll be liable. The meat of a shalom, me and you can eat. So that's the inference from the Mishnah. So Tanin l'hadkan Rabbanan says in the following brisa, Ola ve'emureha, mitzvah from the kazayis, just what we just said, that an ola, that the meat of the ola and its sacrificial limbs can combine together, half an olive plus half an olive gets you a full olive's worth. And if you bring it outside the temple, you're going to be liable. And you're going to be liable. And you'll be liable for the violations of pigel and nosar, and if it's left over, and tummy. Now, right now, the assumption is if you consume this olive's worth of meat, that's of an ola, which is half an olive's worth of meat that's supposed to go up and be consumed on the altar, and half an olive's worth of the sacrificial limbs of the animal that are going to be consumed on the altar. If now they're pigel, right? So they're invalid. If you eat that, you're liable. If they're no sar, if they were left overnight, and you eat that, you're going to be liable. And if they become impure and you eat them, you are going to be liable. It's a long part till the end. So let's see. Bishlama, Bishlama, ha'alas ola. I understand. You want to tell me an ola and not a shlomim. I get it. But I get it when it comes to bring up a sacrifice outside the temple. Bishlama ha'alas ola the Kollel in shlomim lo. In ola is fully consumed. So therefore, the 2 half olives can combine to make me liable if I offer it up outside the temple. Shlomim, the meat of the shlomim doesn't get brought up on the altar. The human being consumes it. So therefore, if you bring that up, if that's half of your thing being brought up outside, you're not going to be liable. That I get. But the other part of your brisa just told me that for an ola, I'm liable pigul v'noser v'tameh. So make the same inference. Only an ola you're liable if these 2 halves combine and you consume them. So my time, why should that only apply to an ola and not to a shlomim? V'hatnan says the Mishnah, kolat pigulin mitzdarfin, the kola nosarim mitzdarfin, all of the pigels combine and the nosars combine. I mean, you have 2 parts of the offering that are both, so to speak, repulsive. They're piggled. So that's going to combine. If you consume it, you'll be liable. And nosar also. If you have nosar and two different parts of the animal combine and you eat it, you eat 2 olives worth, you're going to be liable. So kasha piggle a piggle, kasha nosar a nosar. So on the one hand, you told me it's only an ola that you're liable for piggle and nosar. The Mishnah in Me'ila says you're liable for all sacrifices for piggle and nosar. Which one is it? So it says we're going to have to differentiate a piggle, kasha. Kan be piggle, kan be machshavas piggle. So it depends. One case is the piggle is you're consuming the piggle, and one is the thought process of the piggle. Meaning, when we say you're liable for 2 half olives worth combined together, even by other sacrifices, that's the consuming of piggle. Different parts will combine together, and you'll be liable. That which we said that for an ola you're liable, that's by thinking piggle. Meaning, in ola, if you think to have half an olive's worth to be consumed in Portland and half an olive's worth of the meat and half an olive's worth of the sacrificial limbs, since they both are supposed to be totally consumed on the altar, your piggle, it would be a violation of piggle. But by a shlomim, it's not going to work because if you have in mind to consume it on the altar, the meat gets eaten by a person. And if you have in mind that a person should consume it, the sacrificial parts of the shlomim go up on the altar. So a piggle has to be something which it would be good, just you're having in mind the wrong time or the wrong place. But half of an olive's worth of a meat of a shlomim and half an olive's worth of the limbs of a shlomim are very different. One gets consumed on the altar and one gets consumed by a human being. So what do you have in mind? That it should be consumed outside the right place on the altar? Well, then you're not going to be liable for the part of the meat. It should be consumed by a person, then you won't be liable for the sacrificial parts of the shlomim. So therefore, having in mind is not going to make you liable if it's 2 half olives worth by a shlomim. Okay. Nosar lo kasha. Nosar also not a kasha. Why? Kan ben nosar and kan b'shinososru achla nizar kadam. We'll do this tomorrow.